Hey guys, welcome to week 8 nutrition strategies for sports performance and athletes approach. Okay, so what we're going to look at today is just a quick run over sports nutrition basics. Okay, so what do we actually need to know for sports performance? Just basic nutrition concepts. We're going to have a look at how we go about addressing athletes, what are priorities. So what are the most important things that pertain to them from a performance perspective, and also a sort of a diet overhaul. We're going to do a quick overview of a bunch of the common diets that we see in the media and sort of give some context to how that relates to some athletes and not so much others. We're going to look at the scope of practice for strength and conditioning and sports science coaches within the nutrition area. We're going to go over some body composition analysis tools and what's effective and sort of why we use it. And then we're going to have a look at the area of influence and the practical applications we as strength and conditioning sports scientists can have working with athletes in nutrition and sort of where the buck stops with us before it moves into sort of external referrals. Okay, so when we're looking at the sports nutrition basics, we're looking at energy first and foremost. We're looking at macro and micronutrient consumption and also looking at hydration strategies. So these are sort of the main concepts that are going to influence our performance. Now we can continue to go down the rabbit hole and look at all sorts of specific stuff, which is sort of where current research goes, looking at very minute and minor sort of micronutrient elements and stuff and how certain ingredients or certain supplements might aid performance. But fundamentally, these are the things we need to understand and target is energy, macronutrient consumption, balanced micronutrient consumption, and balanced hydration. So first and foremost, when we're looking at energy is the final phase of which a food or nutrient is converted to for the body to use. Energy is our fuel. It allows us to move and allows us to thrive and perform. It has two common measurements. These are calories and kilojoules. Now, a reason I just reference both is because that we do use them interchangeably. It is important to understand the ratio and how we calculate it. So 1 calorie is equal to 4.184 kilojoules. Okay, it's an important ratio to understand looking at food packages or trying to educate athletes. Generally speaking, if you're just trying to inform someone who's got a kilojoule-based ingredient, just say it's a 1-to-4 ratio. Okay, it's a fairly simple way to do it. It's an easy way for people to calculate their food short and quickly. There are 3 key elements that we focus on with athletes, and that is our energy demand, our energy consumption, and our energy balance. The energy demand refers to the total amount of energy an individual needs to consume. So that's their target goal of food or energy to uptake. Energy consumption is the amount of energy the individual actually consumes. So what is their demand is what they need, and their consumption is what they actually uptake. Energy balance occurs when the energy consumed equals the amount of energy expended. And that's the main one we're trying to look to achieve, is we're trying to create energy balance as often as possible. If there are body composition things we're trying to address, then we're looking for an energy deficit or an energy surplus. So surplus will be if we're looking to increase muscle mass or body composition, and deficit will be look to decrease body fat most often. There are 2 target rates we look at with athletes as part of this, and that's our resting metabolic rate and our basal metabolic rate. And there's a bunch of different ways we can calculate this. It can be from basic formulas, which are readily available on the internet, and lots of reputable websites such as Sports Australia, Nutrition Australia, and also some really useful apps such as MyFitnessPal. Our resting metabolic rate is essentially the amount of energy your body will burn at complete rest. So I give the analogy, if you're sick in bed and you don't move all day, all you simply do is breathe and stay alive, your body will burn that much energy. And that's just your general metabolic processes for staying alive, keeping your heart beating, all that sort of stuff. The basal metabolic rate takes into effect daily activity. So it looks at the amount of energy your body's estimated to burn in a 24-hour period based off general daily activity. This takes into consideration height, weight, daily energy expenditure based off if you're lightly physically active or heavily physically active, and provides sort of a rolling estimate on what you're expected to burn. All right, so macronutrients. Okay, so once we tick off energy, we look at macronutrients. We've got our carbs, proteins, and fats. And I've also got there in the bottom right-hand corner is alcohol. Now, the reason I've put alcohol in there is because traditionally when we talk about macronutrients, we talk about the big 3. We need to acknowledge that alcohol itself as an ingredient still provides energy conversion. So alcohol in its essence operates similarly to a macronutrient where it can be broken down and be used readily as energy. And so it is important when we're trying to track athletes' energies, anyone's energies for that matter, that we are considering what are they consuming from an alcohol perspective. Then you take into consideration mixes and that sort of stuff, and it's also going to add to that energy balance. But fundamentally, as a macronutrient, whilst it's not one of our big three, it does still act as an energy source if it's consumed. So we do need to factor that in. So carbohydrates. Now, this stuff, as I continue to go, guys, is going to be really straightforward. I understand that. I'm not trying to make anything confusing or think that we don't know this stuff, but we just need to create some context on key elements that we need to have as a base level. And more importantly, the key things that, if needed, we need to communicate to the athletes, okay? So if the athletes that we work with can understand these key concepts, then we're going in the right direction. Once we start looking at more, that's when we go into sort of dietetics and that sort of stuff. So this is sort of where we can have an influence and give basic education. So I'm just going to roll through this now as a really basic elementary level. So carbohydrates, primary source of energy for fueling the body for movement. That's the main goal. It is a key fuel source for energy towards the brain as well. 50% consumption is generally used on brain activity and maintaining healthy brain function. Talk about the keto diet a little bit later, but understand that carbohydrates are still a primary source of fuel for the brain. Carbohydrates are categorized into low, medium, and high GI groups. And this is generally, once carbohydrates are compared to sugars, they'll either be slow release, medium release, or high release sugars. Now, the other thing to understand is we want to know how much energy does each gram of macronutrient provide. So in the case of carbohydrates, 1 gram provides 16 kilojoules of energy. So remember that. 3 forms of carbohydrates. We have our sugars, our starches, and our fiber. So sugars are generally come from our fruits or our processed ingredients where they're broken down nice and fast. Starchy are more resistant, more slow release. So generally more of our grains and pastas and potatoes and that sort of stuff. They can become fast release if they go through more processing and have added sugars put into them, which starts to move them into the sugar category. Pardon me. And then we have our fibers, which comes from our fibrous vegetables and fruits with all the skins on and that sort of stuff, okay? So there are 3 forms of carbohydrate. Proteins, okay. If we're strength and conditioning, we love proteins. Really simple, not a hard one for us. Working with athletes, sometimes getting them to eat more protein is one of the main ones. So we'll focus on that now. So it's primarily responsible for the recovery and repair of muscle tissue and function. Now, we commonly associate this with building muscle mass, but what's vitally important to understand about protein is it's critical for muscle recovery. So when we're looking at trying to reduce soreness, reduce muscle damage, we need to have ample protein intake simply from a recovery state before we even worry about building muscle. Then when we're looking to going through building muscle phases, that's when we need to start to increase that protein surplus. Now, the process of proteins, they're broken down to amino acids. We have our essential, which are not produced by the body, which we need to supplement or consume through whole foods. And we have our non-essential, which is naturally produced in the body. You can still, by all means, consume non-essential amino acids. They're still very nutrient dense and still going to provide your body with great energy and great functionality. But as I said, that's how we differentiate them. There are 20 amino acids in total, 9 which are essential and 11 non-essential. And similar to carbohydrates, 1 gram of protein equates to 16 grams of energy. 16 kilojoules of energy. That's going to be important when we look at fats next. So fats, also referred to as lipids, provide the body with slow release energy for daily function. Fats do a whole heap of different stuff. It can be incredibly nutrient dense, but fundamentally, for anybody that's working in a low steady state, just moving around day to day, energy broken down from fats is where it's going to come from. Fats is also vital for building body tissue and cells, as well as aiding the absorption of key nutrients and vitamins. Specifically, it's our fat-soluble vitamins, so our vitamins A, D, E, and K. Now, there are 4 types of fats: saturated, polyunsaturated, monounsaturated, and trans fats. And then each food that contains fats will fall into these different categories. Now, the types of fats is an ever-changing scope or research area. There are guidelines in terms of how much fats to consume from different sources. Fundamentally, there's a lot of argument around saturated fats at the moment. So I don't worry too much about giving specific guidelines on how much fats to consume specifically in the type of fat, but generally being mindful of the consumption of fats overall. And the reason for that is if we look at the bottom, 1 gram of fat is equated to 37 kilojoules of energy. So with that being said, is that if I have 100 grams of fat in a food, that's going to provide me with twice as much energy than 100 grams of carbs. So I need to be mindful if I'm looking for energy balance that whilst fats necessarily might not be bad, we look at the picture there, we've got the salmon, the olive oil, the nuts, and the avocado, all fantastic, high nutrient-dense sources of fats, but have a very high energy cost. So I need to be mindful if energy balance is my goal, is when I consume that, how much does it take away? The other thing that's really cool about fats though, is that they're very satiating, which means they make the body feel very full. So if you're someone that can maintain your hunger, increasing consumption of fats will generally help with this. You hear people all the time, I'm always hungry. Generally people that express always hungry or always need to eat, I never feel full, generally have low fat consumption. This has been sort of communicated through social environments for the best part of 50, 60 years. We're in the 60s when we sort of made fat the bad thing. We brought out these no fat products. So whilst it is higher energy, consuming it can create a satiating effect and can create a more balanced energy supply. So it's important to match that energy supply with the energy task. If it's low intensity, then fat consumption might be really effective. If it's high intensity, then it's not going to serve much of a purpose. So understanding the context of that is really important. And that's why understanding the grams relative to the kilojoule output is a really important thing to be aware of. So macros are micronutrients. Micronutrients provide the body with vital nutrients to ensure optimal physiological function and health is maintained. These include, but aren't limited to, energy function, concentration, attentiveness, inflammation, bone health, cell growth, and maintenance, and a bunch of other stuff. Essentially, these are the little ingredients that keep our body functioning to its highest order. Whilst the macronutrients fuel us, the micronutrients allow us to perform at our highest functionality. Now, generally it involves the consumption of small amounts of these nutrients, hence the name micro. So coming from vegetables and our fruits and all those sorts of stuff. Excuse me. Increased consumption beyond recommended levels does not necessarily increase the benefit. And this is quite common when we see, especially with the water-soluble vitamins, is that we'll pass these through in our urine where consumption is exceeded. So generally with micronutrients, we're looking at creating a balance or having a ratio where we're not exceeding because they'll just be passed through, or we're not in a deficit. We have two categories of micronutrients. We have our vitamins and our minerals. Our vitamins are broken down into two sections. We have our water-soluble and our fat-soluble. So these means that our water-soluble vitamins are broken down through water, whereas our fat-soluble vitamins are broken down through fat metabolism. Then we have our minerals as well, which also work in the same sense as vitamins. It's a slightly different metabolic process. When we're looking at hydration, we're looking at the maintenance of water and electrolyte levels to optimize performance. So I look at electrolytes and water sort of hand in hand, and we'll talk about some key guidelines in a second. Now, what's really important when working with athletes is that water consumption must match water loss during daily activity. So we need to factor in, are they in a heated environment? Are they in a cold environment? What access do they have to fluids? What training are they doing in the days coming up, the preceding days, and what are they coming from? And making sure our water consumption matches those demands. It's also important to maintain electrolyte balance. It's critical for cognitive function, in making sure our water is absorbed properly, and also ensuring our muscles stay hydrated through appropriate fuel sourcing, such as sodium, potassium, that sort of stuff. You've got the list of the electrolytes there as well. So you can hypothetically make your own, but save yourself the time. Hydrolytes is probably, for me, one of the simplest, most effective, and most, whole supplements you can get. It's simply just a concoction of the electrolyte ingredients listed. And consumption of that is such an easy way to tick this box. For me, it's a very low-hanging fruit. It's cheap, it's affordable, it's practical, it's easy to consume. Not many athletes have issues taking it. And generally, for a lot of people, they are dehydrated. So having hydrolytes available is a terrific low-hanging fruit to ensure hydration is maintained. Some key guidelines I like to focus on working with athletes is that Generally speaking, athletes aren't too bad at hitting targets of water consumption. The key is the timing with it. So naturally, the body can only process so much fluid at a time. Now, there are some guidelines around this, and generally speaking, depending on your height and weight, it's going to be between 100 and 200 mils every 15 to 20 minutes. Now, people will have individual variances to this. Salt intake and electrolyte intake will dictate how much water is absorbed and passed through as well. But sticking to this as a guideline is pretty effective. This is going to be really good for people that are chasing hydration. So some people that might not have had access for a while, quickly got an event coming up or a training session, they smash a litre in 10 minutes. It's not going to be super effective because the body's simply not going to be able to process and absorb that fluid quickly enough. So steady amounts, especially in the lead up to competition, in a hydration state, it's going to be really effective. For every 1 kilo of body weight that is lost during activity, we need to consume 1.5 litres to replenish that from a recovery standpoint. The 1 litre will cover the 1 kilo body weight loss to get that fluid level back up, and the half litre will work on the metabolic processes to achieve that. We do know from the American College of Sports Medicine that a 2% fluid loss that reflects a fluid loss that reflects a 2% drop in body weight will have significant effects on performance, especially endurance and power output during activity. So as a guideline, we really want to target not dropping below this. And that's where things like consumption of 200 mils every 15 to 20 minutes during a sporting event is really effective, because I'm not over consuming, so I'm not needing to slow down to process that, and I'm maintaining that fluid intake. So it's going to be really hard to lose that 2%. And as a little preference of mine, I like to aim to match water intake with electrolyte intake on a ratio of 2 to 1. So every 2 glasses of water, I need the third one to be an electrolyte, 2 bottles to 1 bottle, something like that. A really effective way in terms of consumption. All right, athletes, this is where it gets important in terms of how we are addressing what they're doing and what is important to them. First and foremost, energy in, energy out is the number one goal. For athletes, when it comes to performance, management of body composition is an easy way to improve performance. We know that lower body fat athletes have much higher vertical jumps, sprint speed, reduction of injury chance. All these things that we try to dictate our performance come from having low body fat percentage. So ensuring athletes have a really good energy balance is our first target. If they are in a not ideal body composition, so if they're in a surplus body composition or surplus body fat, then we need to create a deficit. This is going to be the most influential way to address their performance. If they are underweight and looking to build muscle, then we simply need to create an energy surplus. Now, despite looking at protein intake or anything, doesn't matter. We need to have an energy surplus first. So it's first and foremost the number one thing we look at. The second one that I prioritize is hydration. The reason I prioritize hydration so high is because without proper hydration, performance output in both trainings and competitions is greatly reduced. And ultimately, our goal here is sports performance. So I need to make sure that hydration is ticked off. Why? Because if hydration is ticked off, training output is going to be a lot better. Therefore, training adaptation and stress is going to be a lot better. Therefore, performance output is going to be a lot better. So energy in, energy out, get that under control, get that right, ensure they're hydrated, and then we move on. Then we start to look at macronutrient and micronutrient consumption. And it doesn't really matter which one comes first. We're just looking for deficiencies across the spectrum. So am I deficient in protein sources? Am I deficient in my energy output in terms of carbohydrates and fats? Am I noticing a performance decrement in one thing specifically? Then we can start to look at micronutrient consumption and if there's any deficits there. Are we getting all our micronutrients from a broad category of foods, or am I specifically only getting the same over and over again and missing out on other things? So we want to address that. Once we've got that right, so we've got our energy balance, we're staying well hydrated, we've got good protein intake, good carbs and fats intake, we've got a nice spread of micronutrients from good whole foods, then we're going to start looking at nitty-gritty details. And what's careful to be understand is that the nitty-gritty details are probably the questions we get the most of. When should I eat my meals? How often should I have them? When should I eat certain foods? What should I eat together? Do I have a slow metabolism? All these things simply don't matter if those first 4 things aren't addressed and in that order. So once we've got that, and then we're trying to find ways to improve, then we can start looking at when are we eating our meals? How close to sporting events? How far away? What are we grouping with our food? So are we having high digestive stress meals together? So are we having heavy carbs and heavy proteins together, which have a really high digestive state? And now we're having that close to a sporting event. We can start to look and address that. So we can look at putting micronutrient matching with certain macronutrient foods to ensure efficiency and digestive processing is really effective. And then we can also look at genetic considerations. So metabolic processes, metabolic diseases, and previous family histories to understand if there's any specific traits that might dictate why perhaps the top 4 things above that aren't working effectively. Once this is all said and done, then supplements can come into it. So the reason we save supplements for last is that 1, we'll save money, and 2, it just simply won't have effect if those other things aren't addressed. The only exception for that is if you have clear macronutrient or micronutrient consumption issues or deficiencies due to lifestyle restrictions, then supplementation might be effective, especially in the case of proteins or fish oils or those sorts of stuff. So it definitely has its place, but in terms of supplemental protocols or going hard on supplements, let's tick everything off first, and then we can add in if we need. If we're not hitting those micronutrient consumptions, then I'm more than happy, especially things like our proteins and different vitamins I'm comfortable to look into. But I want to have a go at trying to reduce them through whole foods first. All right, so I'm going to go through a little bit of a diet overview here. Don't want to spend too long, so hopefully I don't get too carried away. I'm just going to quickly talk about, firstly, why we don't worry about advocating diets too much for athletes, and then we'll have a quick rundown on the common diets. The reason why I'm not huge on trying to get athletes to eat specific diets, and we can profile what diets might suit athletes based off their lifestyle factors, is that for me, simply, diet constitutes restriction and framework that is restrictive. And the issue with this is that athletes are under so much stress already that if I put them on the pressure of a diet, especially in our current social climate, where it's very religious based and very, not culty, but very communal and very identity based, is that it creates a lot of stress. We need to make sure that our athletes' focus is primarily on their performance and their sport. That is essentially their goal. We have to understand the human side as well. So there is going to be biases and there is going to be ethical reasoning and lifestyle reasoning that makes them drawn towards, just like the general population is. So it's really important to understand what diets are, what restraints and what sort of guidelines they work under, and then also what elements might be relevant to performance. So let me quickly rip through these and then we'll talk a little bit more in detail. So I've grouped them a little bit. We've got sort of paleo and keto, high fat, low carb at the top. Generally, they all work off a low carbohydrate based approach and a whole foods based approach. Paleo comes from Paleolithic times, so lots of animal meats, vegetables, no grains, no dairy. Keto, similar to paleo in the fact that it's low carbohydrate, is a high fat, low protein, low carb. So it's an extremely high fat diet. And the goal with this is to switch your energy demand from carbohydrate sources to fat sources to naturally produce ketones in the body for energy. Once ketones are produced, they can work to put the body in a state of ketosis, and then your body starts using ketones as functionality. Now, there's some moving research that's suggesting that running off ketones improves cognitive function and can work to combat metabolic diseases. This is a constantly rolling sort of area, and there's some really interesting neuroscientists doing some work in this moment, Rhonda Patrick and Dom D'Agostino. There's ways to supplement ketones in as well to facilitate that. But their main suggestion is that it's more around cognitive function and more neurological diseases and metabolic diseases than it is about performance. The issue with any diet is once it gets headway about doing something positive, it's then brought to how can we commercialize this? So now it's probably represented actually more as a high fat, low carb diet, which is really misunderstood because a high fat, low carb diet will still be high protein based. And you'll see a lot of keto information out there that it actually is high protein. If you're a high protein in keto, you won't actually go into ketosis. From an athletic perspective, it's just not super efficient. Whilst there's definitely benefits to reducing carb intake at certain times, and there's all sorts of benefits we can do with it, is that we need carbohydrates for performance. Now, whilst reducing carbs might be beneficial for body composition, might be beneficial for energy control, there are times when we need to perform, and carbohydrates is simply a superior form of that. We then have intermittent fasting, which involves a reduction of food timing, so eating within food windows. This can be a really good technique for improving blood glucose control, energy balance as well. So generally speaking, people who might have sugar highs, inconsistent energy throughout the day, generally will have sporadic eating and will generally be high carbohydrate based eating. So intermittent fasting generally will be consuming of high fat foods, so sustainable energy demand throughout the day, and generally eating between a window of say 12 to 8 p.m. Really great way to create caloric restriction, especially in sedentary people. For athletes, the jury's still open. There might be times where it's important to periodize it through, but not super relevant. Vegan, really well publicized now, generally for its ethical reasons. And that's where you have to really understand so the athlete's biases is if they do uphold so those ethical, environmental reasons, then we as coaches definitely have to respect that. There's no doubt you can be a high-performing athlete on a vegan diet. Is it the most efficient and effective way? In my opinion, it's not. It does not mean that you can't pursue that for those above reasons. As I said, athletes are humans. So just because something's really appropriate from a physical performance perspective, we have to respect that they're still humans too. So if they do have ethical or any sort of reasons why, then we need to understand that. Things to be mindful of the vegan diet is obviously it's no animal products at all. So there is a challenge really to get high protein in as well as essential amino acids. Now, obviously, you can supplement this, but it is just simply harder. So it's obviously to be mindful of this. It's going to be really hard to keep people who eat vegan-based diets to keep their body weight up and to keep their protein in the surplus are going to be the main challenges. Mediterranean, as it suggested, comes from the sort of Mediterranean diet. So lots of salads, vegetables, fishes, lots of oils. So not super high on carbohydrates. Generally, a lot of the fuels will come from fats. Sort of probably got a little bit of attention from sort of some supermodels and stuff in sort of the mid-2000s. Actresses and actors and that sort of stuff eating that way. Can be really appropriate for people that are into those sorts of flavors. So it's probably more of a lifestyle one for the Mediterranean. Not too many athletes will come to that one specifically. Flexitarian is probably a newish one. Basically, it's a vegetarian that eats some animal products. So it might be someone who eats chicken and fish. It might be someone who eats meat twice a week, or ethically sourced meat, such as wildly hunted. So things like rabbit or kangaroo, which are generally lean meats as well. So a flexitarian is someone who generally eats a predominantly plant-based diet with the facilitation of some animal products. And generally speaking, from an athlete preparation perspective, it can be a really healthy diet because we're going to ensure really good micronutrients. Just again, with any of those tarian diets, vegetarian, that sort of stuff, vegan, flexitarian, is that we're looking at making sure we're still getting good protein sources and still getting good protein sources that are consisting of essential amino acids. Pescatarian, very similar to flexitarian, obviously just consumption of fish. So lots of people are going to be really beneficial for that. Just be mindful as well, some of those amino acids that don't come from fish are going to be sort of there as well. And one recently that's probably got a bit of attention across the United States and Australia, and this has sort of come from the keto movement, the high fat, low carb, is the carnivore diet, which is a strictly meat only diet. It's quite aggressive in its approach. It involves consumption of high meats with very little consumption of anything else. There might be some cream, some eggs, and some variations people include certain micronutrients as well. Generally, the reason this works with people is that because they're only eating meat, they're getting a high satiating effect, they're getting high fat, high protein, so they're getting their macronutrients they need. Now, generally, carnivore diets or animal products such as red meats and stuff will have very high iron levels, very high nutrient levels. So they're still getting very high nutrients, they're just not getting it from vegetables. Generally speaking, people that participate in carnivore diets create a calorie restriction for themselves. So they're overweight people who like to eat a lot, who are now eating less despite eating high amounts of meat. So what happens is the calorie restriction allows them to break down, allows them to lose weight, improve their metabolic functions. Above all, with all these diets and any other diets I haven't mentioned, if we're putting in a diet-based strategy, generally speaking, it's for body composition, 95% of the time. The other 5% of the time will be for metabolic disease or considerations. So that's the main thing. So fundamentally, all these diets need to work to create a caloric restriction. If someone is making a rapid change to their diet by going aggressively to something different, they're going to be cutting out food groups they're used to eating. So habitually, they're going to be simply eating less. They're either eating less or they're eating more satiating, depending on what type of food they're eating. Okay, so that's a really important thing to understand. The way I like to do it is I like to match people's lifestyle habits with certain traits of traditional diets to then create sort of an effective approach. So people who like eating big, large meals might find elements of high fat, low carb or intermittent fasting appropriate, because it's going to allow them to have high satiating meals with infrequent eating. So they might only eat once or twice a day, but they're being very satiating, very full when they do eat. The people that like to eat a lot, then eating high vegetarian-based diets are going to be really effective. So you start to look at the habitual lifestyle sorts of things. People who have energy issues or sporadic energy demand, moving them to more of a sustainable energy approach might be really appropriate. When we're looking at athletic performance, though, I like to use it as a bit of a periodization method. So, for example, there's some really cool research coming at the moment about using low carbohydrate training in aerobic settings to improve carbohydrate efficiency. So this is an aggressive method that might not be used often, but once you've sort of reached all the adaptation you can from your training program, you can start putting in nutritional strategies to then overload the training program. So if we go through sort of a running progression in interval training, if we then add in a nutritional strategy that's depleting energy source, the body then has to work aggressive again. So using different elements and concepts of these diets can be an effective way to train it. But fundamentally overall, we don't like to specifically suggest or create constraints. To athletes, it's really important to understand elements of diets and elements of eating habits and behaviors, and then understanding how elements of that might be appropriate to sort of address with people's lifestyles. So it's more looking at them as tools and ways of doing things than specifically framework for how people must and need to eat. Okay, so a little bit of food for thought. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. And we'll look forward to talking more in detail with any of your thoughts with that at the workshop. It'll be really good to have an open floor discussion around some of those things. All right, so moving on to our scope of practice. And this is important to understand, as sports scientists, what should we actually be doing with our athletes? How much work should we be doing on nutrition? And when are we sort of going out of our scope of practice? So things we can and should be able to do is we should be able to measure energy demand and consumption for sports performance. So we should be able to educate and provide information on athletes on how much food should they be consuming, okay, for their energy demand. We are looking at sports performance. We know that we should be able to know how much energy athletes need for task performance. So giving them education, fact sheets, and information on this is one thing we can do. We can give them basic strategies for meeting these demands. So how can they go about eating this food? When is it important to carb load? How do we go about timing those sorts of foods in? General conversations around these topics, completely fine, and we should really be comfortable to do this. Being able to recommend food types that complement energy demand, lifestyle, and accessibility are really appropriate as well. So generally speaking, we work in health and fitness, so we should be able to provide general advice on what would complement that person's lifestyle and what do they have access to, and from our training, what do we know that energy demand is? So giving them some framework to walk around that is completely fine as well. Specifically working with them with the hydration strategies, so understanding how much water to consume, what their training schedule is like, and then placing in strategies on hydration around that is definitely something we're more than capable of implementing. And providing basic supplement overhaul and advice. So education on what supplements do, what they are, what's in them can be really helpful. And obviously pointing them in directions of things like governing bodies now like HASTA and Informed Sport allow us to be really confident with promoting appropriate supplements that are SADA and WADA approved. 3 questions you can ask yourself before you're ever sort of engaging in conversation around nutrition, especially in the sports setting, is: are you confident with your advice? And are you confident it is correct? Okay, if you are, then definitely proceed ahead and go for it. Do you believe your information will be received properly? So understanding the dynamics of the conversation. Is the person looking for a short, sharp answer, perhaps to facilitate their bias? Do you feel like the way you're conveying your message is going to be received properly in terms of the context of it? Or do you think it's going to be taken out of context? Again, if you're comfortable with all that, then go ahead, proceed. And is the advice you're giving within your knowledge and skills? So are you confident that you know this? Are you confident it is reviewed in literature there's evidence for it, or is it a concept that you might have picked up from somewhere? Ever-changing landscape of information providing now, we have to be an informed resource for athletes. And because we don't want to delve into too much detail specifically, that's when we want to refer out, is we want to make sure that we are confident with what we are providing the athletes with. Now, when in doubt, refer to the Australian Guidelines to Healthy Eating or the ACA guidelines on their website, which will help dictate what is our scope of practice fundamentally. And then referencing or providing peer-reviewed resources where appropriate as well will help give you some framework and remain safe in your area of practice. Okay, so body composition analysis. Do we use it? Yes, we were going to start using it a little bit more now because we have access to InBody. There are InBody, DEXA scans, skin folds, in my opinion, probably the three most practical and commonly used ones now. InBody uses bioelectrical impedance analysis, which has been around since the 60s and has been an ever-evolving practice. It's recently improved a little bit where they've improved the technology now where they can complete 100% body scans. So how it works is it sends bioelectrical signals through the feet and hands to create a scan of body fat, water, muscle, and bone mass. It used to cover about 30% of the body, generally through the feet or the hands, and then it created an estimate across the rest of the body, and this estimate created a large variability. Now it creates a full scan of the body, so it's a little bit slightly more accurate now and moving in the right direction. It's one of the most commonly used ones in nutrition practices, medical clinics, as well as hospitals, for people that are looking for quick dietary analysis. The pros are it's super quick, takes less than 60 seconds, and provides a really detailed analysis information for the athletic client. The cons are it has an increased variability compared to DEXA, so fundamentally it's simply not as accurate. It can be costly. It can also be really cheap in some places, depending what your arrangement is. We're going to be able to separate sort of a really affordable approach with our athletes, but it can be costly in some places. It costs $30, $40 a scan. And it can vary based off time of the day, water, coffee intake, etc. The effective thing about it does provide a water weight measurement, so you can compare the water weight estimates if you do have varied environments from pre and post test to work out if it wasn't as accurate. So you can take out the water weight and still look at the muscle mass and those sorts of things. The DEXA scan, so dual energy X-ray absorption, is the gold standard measurement for body composition. Provides a super detailed analysis of both bone and muscle mass, as well as fat mass, and it's highly reproducible. So easily the highest measurement one on the market. The cons are it is quite expensive. Most of them cost about $75, and it's time consuming in the sense where it involves you having to go off-site out of the gym. So in comparison to InBody, we can do it inside the gym. Skin folds, we can do it on-site at the gym. Whereas DEXA scans generally going to involve an appointment. You're looking at a couple of hours by the time you drive there, have the appointment, and leave. And then finally, we have our skin folds. So either 5, 7, or 9 site caliper-based physical measurement assessments. The pros for this is it's super cheap, super quick, super simple. But the cons are it provides little detailed analysis. So essentially what it's doing is it's using 5, 7, or 9 site measurements around the body to measure the mil of adipose tissue or skin that is retracted from the body, to then create estimates and formulas to estimate what body fat percentage might be. It requires a high skill set or external training, so it requires certification and tools and a high accuracy of reproducibility. And as I said, it only provides estimates. So with that being said, compared to a DEXA or an InBody, probably doesn't have the same advantages. However, the reproducibility, the cheap, quick approach can be really effective as well. So if you do it yourself and you do it consistently all the time on the same constraints, it can be really effective. And that goes for all body composition analysis. If it's done in the same setting at the same time with all the variables controlled, the accuracy will be more than usable. For us, it helps create really good traction for how athletes track in and out of season, and that's something we're going to look to doing forward. And more specifically, we want to look at performance side of things. So once they're in a healthy weight range, it's really going to be about the maintenance and production of muscle mass for performance. So measuring how that changes in and out of season is going to be really effective for us and something that we look at. Okay, so we're almost there, guys. We're going to go into practical applications and influence. So as coaches, what can we actually do and what influence can we actually have with athletes? Well, ongoing, we can constantly provide education around energy expenditure, when and what to eat. And this is generally a lot of conversations that I'll have with athletes in the gym and in warm up and that sort of stuff. Is that providing them more understanding over a period of time on these concepts. They're really going to help target those low hanging fruits. Learn to understand personality types and habits starts to give us information on what those conversations should look like and how they unfold, and also helps us understand, why do people do what they do? Why do people eat certain ways? Why do people have certain beliefs? Once we start to get more information about their personality types and habits, which is an ongoing environmental thing, we can start to sort of make more educated decisions around our conversations and that sort of stuff. We can constantly build trust and rapport. So obviously, the more we delve into this stuff, the more trust and rapport we build with the athletes, the more influential what we have to say we'll have. So this can be gained once we get really good results in say strength work. Then when we do provide the nutritional suggestions, it's going to have more of a carryover because that trust and rapport has been built up. And then of course it's simply undeniable. I've got the picture of Arnie there. Being a physical role model holds so much weight and more often more weight than we like to think. The reality is if you are, well kept, well in shape person, you're a physical example of the body of work and the mantra that you live and the advice you provide. And so we should all strive to maintain, obviously not everyone's going to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger or a bodybuilder, and we don't have to, but being healthy, maintaining, a relatively healthy body weight and body fat percentage are critical ways to add value and rationale to what we do, preach as strength and conditioning and fitness professionals. And then we have our interventions that we can practically implement, and that's food diaries, something I've incorporated in management mindset meetings, and education resources. So we'll go into that now. So food diaries, the reason I like to get athletes to do food diaries is because generally if they're going to go see a dietitian, they're going to ask this anyway. So if we can tick this off first, we can save the athlete a lot of money. It's a subjective-based tracking tool. It provides a framework for further conversation and discussion, and this is generally done in our management and mindset meetings. So it gives us a bit of a script to go off and sort of guide athletes on some nutritional advice. And it helps to build rapport with athletes. So, having these meetings and these discussions and going through this information allows us to understand where the athlete's coming from, what challenges they faced, all that sort of stuff. And it will provide information on energy consumption, habits, lifestyle, and what access they have to food. So the context around our conversation and information becomes a lot more specific and appropriate to that individual. Management and mindset meetings, these are planned and periodized one-on-one meetings. So looking to add value to the athlete's relationship. And they're designed to touch base on our gym topics. So in this case, we're specifically looking at nutrition, but we'll also look at different athlete mindset things down the track as well, which we'll talk about next week. It also works to facilitate appropriate dynamics for nutrition interventions. So having a one-on-one meeting allows the dynamic to really focus and allow the person to open up about, how can we work on these nutritional things rather than just a throwaway rolling conversation in the gym. Put the time aside, have the education session, provide the information, have the back and forth and start to create some solutions. As I said, it allows ample opportunity to educate athletes and individuals. So we're putting time aside to actually educate them and provide them with information, which is really helpful. What's important is that the meetings need to be thoroughly planned and meaningful. So for what we have to communicate in these messages, for them to be effective, we need to make sure that we show that we put attention, we put time into these meetings, so we're actually getting something out of it. The other thing we can do is we can provide education resources. So we have a bunch of specific fact sheets, either from Sports Australia or some made ourselves, which we can provide the athletes with some basic nutritional strategies to follow, which might be a quick solution if we can't book someone in for a management mindset meeting. Suggesting different books, web links, apps such as MyFitnessPal, Sporting Australia, Sports Nutrition Australia, those sorts of stuff. General recipes is a really effective one. So once we start to understand what foods people like, changing the ways they consume those foods in certain ways can be a really effective method. And then also providing external referrals, so sending them off to dietitians and stuff, should the strategies that we're implementing not be effective, or should they simply need more effect. And that's really once we need to refer out is once we can't alter change. So if what we're doing isn't working, or if they're needing more intervention, then that's simply when we go to refer out to a dietitian. All right, guys, so just to finish, there's a couple of resources here. So obviously, Shane, Healthy Guide, a Guide to Healthy Eating and Sports Nutrition Australia are going to be really effective areas to look at. If you're looking at doing some upskilling or training, the one I would recommend will be Precision Nutrition. It's an American group, probably one of the more unbiased to sort of diets and that sort of stuff in terms of commercialization. Probably, but a really well put together course that lots of sports scientists, PTs will do to gain that qualification without going down the university route. For a quick, concise one, Lane Norton on Instagram is a nutrition scientist, biochemist. I find his stuff to be really valuable in terms of what's important and what's not. And then if you also want to look into more of the scan work that we use, it's the in-body scans, so the links there as well. All right, guys, that's it for today. Hopefully you found that useful, and we will reconvene next week.